and get started. So as I mentioned to the panelists before, this session began, I think that there are sort of two sections to this conversation. One is thinking about each of the panelists as members of our community, as whole people, and people that we care about, right? I want to have a conversation a little bit just about who are they in this moment, right? How have they grounded themselves in their own self-care practices in order to sustain such an impact, right? This year has been just all of the things. And then we'll move into more of an understanding of their professional roles and advice that they might have for us and for how we care for ourselves individually and for our families. So I think that one of the most overused words of the last year has been unprecedented, right? We've all heard it a million times. This year has been we've experienced things that no one has experienced before. And in some ways, we're always experiencing things that no one's experienced before, right? But this year was traumatic, right? It was exhausting. It was, just really, it was much, much more than just unprecedented. At the same time, I think that this year was unique in that it was paradoxical almost at all times. There were moments when you were both excited to be able to be with your family and also exhausted by the fact that you're with your family, or even to the extremes of experiencing this just profound experience of loss. And at the same time, profound experiences of gratitude, really oftentimes in the same exact moment. And I'd like us to sort of think about that as we're responding to just where were we, where were each of you a year ago? This year, this weekend really is the anniversary of the beginning of the pandemic as it affected our area. So I'll turn it over to, maybe we'll start with Courtney, especially because you've been working in the school. And so you were both, being yourself right in the world, but also helping the school transition into a virtual environment. Where were you and how has your self-care practice evolved in order to keep you, sort of grounded in this experience?
Thank you for the question, Lory. So I'm a member of the senior administrative team at Sidwell. And so I never thought I would be in such a position of influencing decisions that impacted the lives of people that I care so much about. I mean, it just sort of like the stakes went up so high, so fast. And so there was the weight of the decision-making I remember feeling, like sitting in the Zartman drawing room with my peers on the admin team and talking about, okay, so worst case scenario, we'll probably be closed for like 2 weeks, right? Like that was sort of where we were, thinking, okay, like, and to us, that was like a huge deal that like students would be away from school for 2 weeks. And so just sort of trying to figure out how to message that, make sure that students had what they needed, make sure that division heads had the support that they needed, equipment was being distributed to students, all of that was in our decision-making. And so there was sort of this naivete of this is going to wash over and be over quickly. I didn't really think about my own children or parenting until I kind of got home that night with my kids. And it sort of like hit me that all of a sudden my different identities are kind of like colliding at this intersection, right? It's like, okay, it's like, how am I actually going to do this and support the school that I care so much about as an employee and as a leader, and then also support my kids. There was a small amount of excitement I had because I thought 2 weeks at home, like I can get my closets cleaned out. I can get this place really organized, like, so it was I had all, like you said, Laura, like all the feelings that I was experiencing on, March 13th, 2020. I didn't have any idea what was ahead of how hard it was about to be. Like I thought, oh, this will be over quickly. And so it felt in that moment like it could work. It wasn't until April that I realized that, oh, this is going to be a much longer thing. People are really in pain. Working parents can't figure this out. People need real solutions. The school needs to respond in support of its employees, and everyone's looking at me. And so I started feeling the weight of the responsibility of being the chief people leader, and really trying to dig into like what we could do to help people. So it goes on from there, and I can tell you guys more, but I wanted to just sort of succinctly try to answer your question.
That's perfect. I love that introduction. So I don't know if someone else wants to jump in and give us an understanding of sort of where they were or we can, continue that conversation however you all see fit. Karin, would you like to chime in as someone who was, in not only a leadership position, but also helping others, right, dealing with their own self-care a year ago?
Sure. So for me, I would say thank God for InterVision's Institute for Spiritual Development, and that I have a foundation there, and that for those of you who are familiar with the Jan Levant Sant, InterVisions is her, creation, her institute. And so our last time together was the first weekend in March. And, at that point, there was no discussion about not coming back together the first weekend in April, but things switched very quickly. And I had a lot of gigs lined up. And a year ago yesterday, everything was canceled. And I'm, an entrepreneur, an individual contractor. So I was like, okay, I kind of freaked there for a minute, and then again, like I said, through just having the foundation and family, through InterVisions, and through we went, everything just turned virtual very quickly. The Center for Mindful Living, that platform went virtual. So I think that my work just, is the foundation for my own practice. And so thankfully, I just was surrounded by very like-minded people, and, my sisters from ministers and other coaches from InterVision. So, there was that. And then just, I'm blessed having two parents in their 90s who are still alive, and being able to, help them. But, I'll be honest, initially I was like, oh my God, I don't know where anything's gone. I don't know where my money's coming from. And, and then I just grounded myself and got my act together, and, here I be. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing that. I'm going to turn to Dominique, but I just want to chime in and comment on something that you said, Karin, in terms of having that moment of like, what do I do, right? Because I think that for me, I've always had these different practices that keep me going, but they're not really, I never thought that I was going to be using them to actually keep me going, right? Like, I think that we all had that moment where we were like, oh my, what's next, and I think it's just so interesting how each of us has responded differently, but though that practice having existed before allowed us to kind of carry through. And I think that one of the things that this moment has shown to people who didn't necessarily have a conscious, either anti-anxiety, coping mechanism, or, even getting down to meditation or things like that, I think that it's made everyone aware of how critical building those skills and building it truly as a practice, right? How critical that is, because we're all going to need to turn to those, those skills at some point. So Dominique, if you want to go ahead and tell us about where you started last, at this time last year, and your practice over the year, I would welcome that.
Sure. So several weeks before the pandemic, I've been talking to God like, hey, God, I need a pause. Like, work and life was just grinding. And I was like, God, I would love a pause, but there's really no pause available for life. And then suddenly we got started hearing about the coronavirus, and slowly started feeling like, okay, things are getting closer and closer to the United States. Now it's in Maryland, now it's in DC. What are we going to do? And my professional life, I'm in the business of providing care and education for children, largely in part so that other people can go out into the world and work. And so there was no precedent for stopping that. It's like surface level, we're there so people can go out and be productive. And so suddenly we were forced to figure out, what are we doing? Unlike K through 12, early care was not given instruction. So we literally were like, let's figure this out. What are we doing? Can we stay open? Do we have to close? We didn't have directives to say you're mandated to close. So we were literally sitting in the hallway, the admin staff talking to each other. What does this mean? What does this mean for the center? What does this mean for our parents? What does this mean for our students? We provide so many things for our students. We just weren't sure what was going to happen. And then we were like, okay, we'll be closed for 2 weeks. I decided, if we're closed for more than 2 weeks, I'll paint my bedroom. Still haven't painted my bedroom, but that's a whole nother thing. And then it became like, this is real. We don't have a blueprint. We don't know what to do. And so I literally sat with my family and said, all we can do is take it as it comes. There was no, just no map. And, my family has lived without a map before. That's not uncommon, but it was bigger than us. And so we knew we just had to settle in with each other and like really hold on to each other. And in my professional life, I felt obligated to still be a standing point for families. Like my work is in service of families and children. And so I knew I had to do enough to steady myself so that I could then be steady for them. And so that's how we proceeded. And then in April, it was the same. And we add, like each month, we try to add a little bit of a layer of protection and a layer of strength so that each month we could get a little stronger and moving forward. And that's just how we made it.
I think that the relationship between you as a mom, right? Caring for your family and saying, look, we've got, we kind of got to hold on to each other and just ride this wave, and at the same time being in this kind of paradoxical role. It kind of goes back to that dichotomy, right? Of having other families that really are relying on you to be holding on to their seat so that they ride the wave too, how have you been able to make that pivot, right? So that you came from that moment of, here's the impact, yes, we kind of rationalize it. We figure out, does the center stay open? Does the center stay closed? But also, where do you fall in helping those families as they're making their decisions, in terms of what's next? Or maybe you don't figure into that. Maybe they just have to go to work. And so, center stays open and so they come in or they don't, or, how does that help? How does that happen?
We shut down. We closed March 13th was our last day, and we closed. We again were expecting a 2-week closure, but in that moment, we came together, and first we cared for each other. And when I say we, I mean the staff. We talked with each other a lot. We gave space for sharing feelings and fears, and just like we met on Zoom and just really used the space to say what we were feeling. We didn't isolate from each other. We were away from each other, but by nature, our job is in close contact. We're there for several hours of the day. We are a family unit. And so we treated each other in the present absence as family. And so that building our strength then allowed us to help others. And it goes directly back to mindfulness and self-care. You can't pour from an empty cup. So we knew we had to get ourselves together first. And it wasn't perfect. It wasn't like, never, don't show fear, don't show sadness. It was like, yes, we feel this way too. We can hear how you're feeling, because we didn't try to hide how we were feeling. We could accept all the emotion and all the things involved because we made a point to feel it ourselves as a unit. And so we just did what we could. We provided activities, we checked in with our families. It was just sort of several pods of family. So it was the internal working family, spread out to your own family, spread out to your work family. And we just made a point of staying connecting. Connection got us through. Connection with each other really pulled us through every day.
So one of the things that I've been thinking about, and I think that's a perfect transition to getting back to Courtney's role as a people, sort of the people leader, right? I think a lot about the term self-care and how sometimes it can be, I think, almost perceived as like self-indulgence, or like, we kind of have an image in our minds oftentimes, especially for Black people, right? Sometimes self-care feels a little bit outside of our reach. And self-care doesn't mean solo care, right? It doesn't mean isolating. It means, for many of us, it means coming together. And so I'm interested in that kind of idea, and how in your role at Sidwell, turning to Courtney, how your role at Sidwell, how did you, deal with that transition, that moment, in terms of, interacting with your colleagues, interacting with your family? Was there any sort of external strength that built into your self-preservation sort of practice or process as we were in that, even in the last year?
Wow, that's good. Well, I'll say from a community standpoint at Sidwell, what we realized we took for granted was the spontaneity of the in-person connection that was such a huge part of what made our community feel so strong and connected. And all of a sudden we are all disconnected. And we're all now in these little tiny boxes. And the more people on the screen, the tinier the boxes become. And so it was really about trying to figure out how to become intentional with communication. And so some of the things that my team did, I have a wonderful team of HR professionals that I work with at Sidwell Friends, is we started proactively just reaching out to employees. We just created a list, a Google Doc of all the employees' names. And every time we had a touch point, we would make notes about how that person was doing, any specific things that the school could help with as an employer. And we try to start figuring out, like, what are the solvable problems? And then what are, to your point, Lory, sort of the paradoxes, the tensions that we're just going to have to help support people in holding through this time, because we can't solve it. Like, I tried really hard to cure COVID, I couldn't. So, it was like, we're going to have to deal with this virus and trying to figure out how to keep people safe from it, but also support the fact, like I said earlier, that their worlds are colliding. And so now you have people who are concerned about their responsibilities as caregivers for family members. And I think some of the people who had it the hardest were the ones with the youngest children. So you're trying to do your job as a math teacher and you have your 1-year-old tugging at your leg. And your spouse might be an attorney, or maybe you're a single parent and there's no other adult in the house. I mean, all these different things that people were dealing with that were never part of sort of the conversations, because they had these different nice separations for work and home, right? And so, the school went into the mode of trying to solve what was solvable. I continue to say that. And we held space for the polarities and the paradoxes and the dilemmas that we couldn't solve, and we listened really well. I think I used that same strategy in my Courtney home life as well. I did seek outside support because in April, I sort of hit a wall from exhaustion of like trying to be of service to everyone, trying to do everything, trying to respond to every email within, a work day. And then having my own children with their needs, at the time, having my mother-in-law in assisted living and sort of feeling unsure about what was going to happen with her, and just the stress and worry. And so I got support through therapy, which was very helpful, and sort of like trying to figure out how to manage the anxiety I was feeling at that time. And I tapped into my networks of good folks. So, when you're fortunate to be like a coach, other coaches, right? And so we started bartering coaching services. It helped me get really, really clear and intentional about, my purpose, right? And so I was able to say no to things that were not in service to like the clarity of what my purpose was. So those outside support mechanisms helped me on a personal level, because I really prided myself. I would say my identity was wrapped up in being an anchoring support for people, like, being the, excuse me, the Olivia Pope of Sidwell was sort of like how I viewed myself. I'm the fixer, I'm the problem solver, I can fix any problem you bring to me. And all of a sudden being faced with, a gargantuan problem that there's just no way I could solve. And so those outside resources really helped me get clear and learn how to take care of myself, like how to take space for myself, how to breathe, how to rest, how to close the laptop at a certain hour. Early on in the pandemic, I remember my husband coming like to my office and saying like, Court, it's 9 p.m. Like, when are you going to go to bed? You've been in front of the computer since 7 a.m. And I'm like, really? It's 9 p.m. He's like, you didn't eat dinner? Like, you've just been sitting here all day. And so, just being aware of time, being aware of like the need for physical activity, the need for fresh air. I had to become intentional in terms of how I managed my time and how I scheduled my time. And so I built in scheduled breaks. I built in walks in the morning, and I'm a better person because of it. And no, I don't respond to every email within one business day, but that's okay. Like, the world didn't come to an end because it took me 2 days to respond to people. So, I'm learning and growing.
I love one of the things that you said was just so, I think for me, it resonated so much. The idea of needing to schedule in, not only breaks, but like walks and, remembering to like literally take care of yourself, right? Not just the sort of mindfulness and like all of the, kind of buzzword mindfulness, self-care, but that we're all kind of lost in time. That's one of the things that I feel most profoundly about this year is that, yes, a whole year has passed, but at the same time, I'm like, what day is it? Where am I? And I'm curious if we can talk just for a couple of minutes about what it's like to be, how have you dealt with that feeling of being lost in space and time? Because I think that now we've moved through a whole more than a year, right? And yet, well, maybe not more than a year, but we've moved through a year. And yet I think that we're all kind of not sure, have we used a year? We've lost a year. Have we used a year? Where are you all, how do you feel about, every day, right? Do you get up? What's your routine like? How do you make time work, if you will? And I'll turn to Karin just because she's next, sort of in our conversation, but whoever wants to chime in is welcome.
I start every day with prayer. I have 2 different prayer partners, and each day for me is really different. Beyond that, because my schedule is always different. But one thing that I actually would like to speak to, just from things that both Dominique and Courtney brought up, one of the things for me that supported me in staying present is a group that I was already facilitating a meditation at the Center for Mindful Living. But after George Floyd's death, I knew that I couldn't not acknowledge what had just happened. And so I did probably about 3 to 4 weeks worth of meditations that were specifically focused on unconscious bias, prejudice, police brutality, all the words. And that turned into coming together in community. And community is definitely, something that's come up here in connection. And that really just created a space to ground us in the moment. And some of the Black folks were like, I can't hear sometimes I would start with a long list of names of all those that we've lost over the years. And, people were like, I can't hear the names anymore. And some of the white folks were like, I didn't know what you were doing until I heard this name or that name, So I realized that to bring everyone together, I really had to create a safe space and let that go, the focus on police brutality and prejudice and all that stuff go, so that everyone felt safe to be in this space, to then open up, to look at our similarities and differences. And there were several white men who contacted me and said, you've created this beautiful community of people of color, and I don't want people to feel like they can't honor their voices, or well, that's my word, honor their voice. They, that they don't feel comfortable to be in the circle because this white man is showing up. And I said, no, this is about bringing all of us together. So that's really one of the things that's kept me from getting lost, is having this group that, I facilitate the meditations, but it's comforting to me as well to know that the group is coming together and the space that's created, for all of us. And Courtney mentioned holding space, we're all holding space for each other, really. Sorry if I kind of went off on a tangent there, but I just had to share.
I think I wanted to,
in my heart.
The notion of like space is something that has really been profoundly impactful to me over the last year, sort of like holding space, taking up space, like what space do I need? What space do my kids need? The room I'm sitting in actually in my house is the room I turned into, look at that cutie, my Zen den, right? So in pre-pandemic times, I probably would have taken our guest bedroom and like put a queen size bed in here and, just made it really nice in case we had a visitor. And so in pandemic times, I said, you know what, I'm probably not gonna have any visitors for a while. I'm gonna turn this room into like a me room. And so this is the room where, I have all my favorite books and my favorite candles and my favorite chair. And I can come in here and just have space for me to meditate, to do yoga, to pray, to ride my Peloton, to do whatever it is I want to do. Is like, this is my space. And I can't tell you like what that's done for me, like mentally and psychologically, just to have like what I view as a physical space where I can just come and just be in the fullness of me in my home, where I spend all my life now. And so that's been a thing that I've done that I didn't realize how much good it would do for my self-care. That it has. Like, I come in here every single day and do something in this room. I actually kind of fell asleep in here last night reading, sitting in this chair. And so that has been helpful. So I encourage people, like, maybe you can't devote a room in your home, but something where you feel connected to the physical space and it calms you in a way, has been really useful for me. So something I've done.
Yeah, I can say that I know for myself, one of the things that I found was just literally sitting in my yard. Like, I never sit in my yard. And like last year, I pretty much moved into my yard, in order to really just kind of have another, have a separate area where I wasn't, doing literally all of the things, and being able to kind of have that dedicated space. I think that so on Thursday nights, I didn't do it this week because we had the talk, but on Thursday nights at 9:00, I host basically I guess it's just a silent meditation on Black and Breathing is what we call it. But it's just a moment, basically a 30-minute pause where we celebrate, Black life. And 2 weeks ago, our meditation was on space, and this concept of just like, what is, like, how does this manifest, right? Taking up space, being, the physical space that we take up, right? And being in ownership of that, how space affects Black and brown bodies. And so I think that it's really important, like, this is not like necessarily on the narrow topic of self-care, but on this greater, right, sort of narrative that we have at all times. We're always in space, we're always affected by space, and we allow space for others. And that is part of our experience of community, So anyway, I liked it. So I want to turn to a question from the audience. And I'm going to pivot this question a little bit, so just be warned. So the question is specifically for Dominique, or targeted at Dominique, but I think that each of you will be able to chime in on this. And I have heard from each of you as well that you have, parents who are up in age and who either need care from you or, are in the care of others. So we'll talk about that too. But this question is, from your experience as a professional and as a personal caregiver, do you have any thoughts on the relationship between caring for others and caring for oneself? And that was directed at Dominique. That question came from Matt Pearson, class of 01.
Thanks for the question. For me, it's a bit cyclical. where providing care for others gives me joy and gives me sort of the energy, a bit of energy, but I also really, really, really have to be mindful that I can't go too far. Excuse me for 1 second. My children are having a party. Sorry. Um, Saturday morning and friends are here. Well, anyway, like you have to be careful that you don't exhaust yourself to the point where there's nothing left to give. And so before the pandemic, honestly, I would empty myself, and that was not productive. The pandemic just shut me down, and it was like, you don't even have a choice but to honor yourself and to take care of yourself, because you will not be able to do it for anyone else. And so I could not look for outside sources. I had to really focus in on me. And so being I'm also a Cancer zodiac sign. So it's like, it's kind of in my blood to care for others. It's like I'm a solo parent, a Cancer, and an educator of young children. I don't have a choice but to take care of other people, it seems sometimes. But I say all that to say, you have to really ground yourself in knowing what you're doing and why you're doing it. It's not just about constantly putting people first. The only way to be able to be there for people is to be there for yourself. And the pandemic drove that home to a way that I had never experienced before. And in fact, it freed me to do more for people because I felt better about doing for myself. I read a lot of Brene Brown, and she talks about the ability to offer help. If you can't ask for help, you have like some feelings behind help. You think offering help and providing care is for the weak. So you have to be able to do it for yourself as well, to really truly be in it. And so once I read that, and once the pandemic happened, I really started to be involved in providing care for myself. And it just freed me up to do so much more in different ways. And care became to look different. It wasn't just material things. It was a lot of intangible things, like just listening, or looking at people, like just connecting with people is a strong sense of care that we got a lot of, because we couldn't really be so close to each other, but we could see each other. And I think so like my mind was blown wide open when I knew that there was another level of providing care for people. And that's a direct effect of the pandemic. I know I went all over the place, but that's really how I feel about that.
No, you didn't go all over the place. I thought that was an awesome response, and it was spot on. It actually reminded me of a conversation that I had during the pandemic. It was actually just after George Floyd's murder, when Marissa Nathan Gerson brought together a number of alumni to have a conversation really about, like, what are our resources, right? What do we have? What can we give? How do we respond to these, this time, right? And one of the things that she did at the end of the call, we had this like really powerful conversation, and people are like making spreadsheets, and we're like, okay, we're mobilizing, and she said at the end, like, one of the practices that she does with women in particular, and it wasn't just women on the call, but one of the practices that she does is ask for what, we've had this conversation about what resources we have and what our skills are, who we are as professionals, who we know, whatever, but ask for something, right? What do you need? And she just had us go around. She was like, if you don't have it right this second, you have to put it in the spreadsheet. What is it, something that you need? Because so often we have really genuinely don't know how to ask for things. And it's not that we don't need things, it's that we've not learned how to ask or to articulate the need that we have. And that truly is how we connect, not only to be vulnerable enough to care for ourselves, but also just to be able to connect to other people at all, is by showing, and being able to show up for ourselves by saying, what, and it can be as simple as I need a moment, or taking a pause in order to gather our thoughts, or in order to, prepare for caring for another person. So anyway, I really appreciate that. I think that was a really guiding thought. And I appreciate you sharing it. So I want to talk, and unless someone wants to chime in on that point, I would like to think about how you all have cared for your families. So not just yourselves, right? But the family being an extension of the self. How have you all dealt with having, elderly parents, or in my case, I'm like the only driver under 70 in my family, right? And so I've got this slew of elderly people who always have something going on. And it's not like I'm a caregiver per se, but I have to give care. I have to be available at times. And that has factored into so many of my decisions in the last year. But I find for myself, I'm in a much better position now, having endured a pandemic, than I was, when I was 25 and I was, caring for my mother who was dying. I didn't know, I had no toolkit, right? I learned, and this is just kind of like biographical, I learned during my bar summer that if I said like, I have to do this for myself, right? The bar, everybody understands, you study for the bar, you got to, cut everything else out, right? And that suddenly I was free. I was like, oh my God, I've got hours in the day that I never knew I had. Now that has been applied to 1,000,001 things. When I mentor people who study for the bar, I tell them like, look, you tell your family I'm doing this for myself. If that means that in the evening you get to take a bath and you get to do your hair and, whatever it is, take those moments because you don't get them back, I think that I've used that through this pandemic in order to create that space for myself to be able to, make sure that my brother has got whatever he needs, or, go out to my grandparents' house, if they need it. But how has that worked for you? And how are you interacting with your families, and, what choices have you had to make in light of this crazy time? And that's for anyone.
I can jump in there. As a person who's pretty self-driven, I would say lists make me happy. And what I realized is that I needed to put myself on the list, right? And so psychologically, then it didn't feel so self-indulgent. I was like, what do I need to do for Courtney today, right? I hurt my back in the middle of the pandemic pretty significantly from a very a small lift that did like a really pretty bad job on my back. And so when I lost physical mobility, it also hit me. And I realized that I needed to do more to care for myself physically, that I needed to sort of build and incorporate, physical stretching and these kind of things into my day to make sure that, because I'm sitting a lot, right? I'm sitting more at home than I was at school. I mean, I would wear my sneakers to campus because I'm running around the whole campus, checking on people, going to the classrooms, going to the athletic center. I was not the HR director who was just sitting in her office. And all of a sudden, you get sent home and you're sitting all day. And so I had to become more conscious of that too, and just flexibility as a person in her mid 40s, you become less flexible as you get older. And I realized that too. I'm like, I'm stiff and I don't feel good. So, adding myself to my list and using what, speaks to me in terms of the scheduling aspect. I'm a scheduled person. And so putting myself on the calendar, putting myself on the list, engaging in connections that are meaningful, virtual fitness classes or virtual groups with my church, the spiritual fulfillment with people who share the same beliefs as me, has also been very, very important. So, I think knowing yourself and knowing, how to get through to yourself, right? It's like a self-coaching almost, like, what do I need in this moment? And then you get really clear on that and you can focus on that. And like you said, Lory, everything else just kind of falls away when you get really, really clear about what you need. That has been a gift for me of the pandemic, because I think that I was on a path of continuing to be a person that just poured out. And to Dominique's point, like, then you have nothing left. Like, I used to think success was feeling empty at the end of the day. And what I've learned through the pandemic is, like, no, success is actually having a little something left at the end of the day for me. That's been, so from that standpoint, I look at the pandemic as, the pause that we all didn't realize we needed in this way, but it's given us a lot too. And that is what I try to focus on.
Karin, would you like to join us? Chime in.
Sure. So my mother has multiple sclerosis. She was actually diagnosed the summer after, or the fall after I graduated from Sidwell. And I just, for any of you who know the love and kindness practice in mindfulness, she's my go-to person, the person that just, my benefactor, just brings me love, just, smiles dance through my body when I think of my mom. So my dad has a great team of companions that, come in and out of the house. And my brother in particular, is well, both my brother and sister are great cooks, but my brother is great at contributing, will make something for himself and his wife, and have some, drop stuff off for my parents. So I feel that we, all came together. I'm not really a morning person, but I was, at Giant at 6 o'clock in the morning to do shopping and just praying up, protection around me and everything initially, because I was not feeling going into the store. So that then mixed with, again, just having the family, my Intervisions family, and then Iyanla was, doing some stuff on Facebook, and different organizations have done different, mindfulness retreats and everything. So there was a lot for me to be able to do to support grounding myself, in addition, to my own practice, and to putting into, the meditations I told you I facilitated in the prayer call, being able to acknowledge what I needed to release and make that part of the meditation so that I was fully present. So, a mix, I think, combination of the balancing.
So I love, one of the things that you mentioned was just like that anxiety of getting ready to go, like, into the store. These tasks that we kind of took for granted, right? You just get up and go do this thing, and then you're like, oh my God, I need a bubble of like good energy around me, before you embark on these mundane tasks, So I'm excited to hear about your family's, I guess, coming together, not necessarily as an extended family, but because, you're talking about your siblings and your parents, but was your family close knit in that particular way going into the pandemic? Or is that something that has built out in terms of, like, sort of actively supporting each other, sort of in the day to day? Obviously, you've got a person who, needs regular care, and that's not new. But how has that built out or changed?
We would get together to do things, barbecues and stuff like that. But I think that there is more of an appreciation of family, and also Monty, my brother, suggested that we start doing Zoom calls. So we've done a couple of Zoom happy hours to come, to all come together. And so I think there's more of an appreciation. I'm the one that's closest to our mom, and that's just the way it is, and that's how it will be. But yeah, I think that there's definitely an appreciation of each other.
So we have a question from the chat, and that is, how do we get back to normal? I think that's a big question. But I want to give us a little bit of time to talk about that. And I also want to just mention a phrase that really has resonated with me, and something that Courtney said just a few minutes ago, and now I can't remember what it was, but so I'm a Pelotoner as well. And one of the things that I remember that has just stuck with me in terms of, prioritizing, right, and creating space for oneself is this idea of like, when we don't, make time for ourselves, we're basically marking on the list and saying, you're not important enough. And every time we sort of skip our workout or I'm using workout as an example, really, because it could be, our mindfulness practice, our prayer practice, our time with our families. Every time we skip over that in order to, provide care for someone else or to, do our jobs or all of these different things, every time we skip that thing that we need to fill our tanks, we're saying that's not important enough, and thus we're not important enough. And so I want to think about that as we talk about this, idea of going into what is going to be the future, right? What does the future look like for sure? That's a question that I think we're all trying to, imagine. But also building into that and sticking to this theme, how do we ensure that we're remaining on the list, right? As someone who is not only important enough, but really core to each of us moving forward as families, as communities, as leaders within our communities. How do we stick to that, and how do we commit to that? So that question is for anyone. And if the question wasn't clear, just let me know.
In my center, we have a bit of a running joke where we say, never waste a crisis. And so we just take that and we're like, okay, this crisis going on, what can we take with this? And I think the pandemic has put us in a place where we have a bit of an opportunity to pick and choose what we bring with us. Like I felt kind of pre-COVID that a lot of things were just kind of given to me or gifted to me. And when I say given or gifted, I don't mean like someone bought me a present and gave it to me, but it was almost a little bit of like, that's how things are. That's, that's where society is. That's what you do. You put your head down, you grind real hard, you take care of everybody, and you go. But the pandemic opened a little bit of space to be more selective about what you bring with you. I learned how to let a lot of stuff go and really focus on like, you really can't control that. Like I cannot control that there's no toilet paper at the store. I can't control that. So I'm gonna let that go. And the practice of letting go small stuff opens up the practice of letting go bigger things that you can't control. And so I think that provides space for what you bring with you, and being mindful about what you bring with you from this day forward just allows for your new reality, your new normal to be a little bit more cultivated by you. I don't know if it's like my age or like if it's just like a sudden clarity of what life can be and what life should be, but I really feel that I have way more control about what I do moving forward. I equate, even though I love my job, I kind of equate it, working life as like a hamster wheel, like you get on and you can't get off, because if you stop, it just kind of falls apart. But I've let go of that. The pandemic was like, you can't stop, whether you want to or not, you will stop. And so I just feel like I can make some other choices. And so that's how I'm going to move forward, because I can be like, no, I'm putting that down. I'm going this way. So.
I'm not sure that we necessarily want to go back to what we were doing before. I think that has been a lesson and, sort of a noticing I have had. We've been talking about in our leadership at Sidwell that we need to be intentional about capturing the things that we've learned, right? The things that we might keep. I joke with my husband all the time, like the curbside food pickup, like they can keep that forever. Like that's the best thing ever. I could pull right up and you bring my food out to me. I'm like, that's awesome. So, things like that, I hope will stay. And I hope other things that we've learned through the pandemic, as a mother, the time that I have gained with my children when they otherwise would have been in summer camp because I'm like running, got to get to DC to get to my job. And, they're in camp all summer and I'm working. Now, all of a sudden we have all this time and I can design, Camp Mommy and, those kind of things are really precious. Like that to me is that we've lost a lot. We've lost family members through the pandemic because of COVID, and so it really does hit home. There have been real moments of grief and loss and fear and worry. There have been moments without toilet paper and all of that. I think we all have experienced that. But there also have been things that I think that will help to shape the new, as a friend wrote in the chat, the new familiar. So I'm not necessarily looking forward to going back to what we used to do. I think we can do something better moving forward.
Yeah, I don't think there's any going back. Every moment is a new moment, the opportunity to begin again. So how are we beginning again? And, what is that attitude towards what we are experiencing? For example, like with the toilet paper. Okay, there's no toilet paper. So, am I going to have a fit about that? Or I'm just going to, okay, so I guess I'll find something else to use, whatever. So I think that I know, for example, with Intervisions, it was already Iyanla's plan to go to create an online program. So the pandemic just made us do it quicker. Now we are, totally redoing the curriculum. So it's going to be a different program. But I know, for example, with the Center for Mindful Living, that we are going to, regardless of if we go back into our physical space, we'll have a virtual platform as well, because of all the people we've been able to bring in, not only from the United States, but from other countries being online. So yeah, I definitely feel that, I'm not sure what the phrase was that someone wrote in the chat, not a new normal, but whatever that phrase was, that's where we are. We're not going back.
I was just trying to check for the phrase, and that was a new familiar is what Abby said. And I like that a lot. I think that was really great. We have 2 more questions and sort of a statement from the chat. But before we move to those, because we are at noon, I just want to note that we've reached our time. So if you all have another 10 or 15 minutes, I would love to take it. I know that Karin is going to move into the mindfulness, half hour at 12:30. So I do want to remind everyone who's here that we have another session. Today's a pretty full day. But I also want to talk about self-care for children. So before we move into the question, which there's one question that I definitely want to talk about. But if you all have any advice for parents, I think that sometimes we can leave children out of the self-care conversation because children can't really, they can't necessarily care for themselves, right? But children can care for themselves. They can create, journals. They can have, private, sort of quiet time. They can do so many different things and protect their own energy, even if they can't, do the sort of traditional, sort of stereotypical self-care practices. I'm wondering, this question is specifically for Dominique because of your role, but this is open to anyone. Do you have any recommendations for people who are trying to cultivate a self-care practice or even a mindfulness practice for their children?
Sure. My idea of self-care actually first came from Sidwell when I was in 6th grade. one of the 6th grade classrooms instituted mental health days. And before that, I had not thought anything about mental health days, but a mental health day in the 6th grade was sort of like a relaxed school day, movies, popcorn, fun, just not straight academic stuff, but fun. And so over the years, I carried the idea of allowing space for mental health days, whatever that may be. So for parents, it is important to model what you want your students, or not your students, what you want your children to see. They need to see you taking care of you, so that they know it is a normal practice. It is not something that's one-off. It's not something that's, by chance. It's not something that you should feel guilty about, but you model and express, this is what you need, or this is what I need. I need some time to, catch my breath, feel better. You don't have to lay all your burdens on your children, but you can definitely say, I'm feeling tired. I'm feeling overwhelmed. I'm feeling a little bit stressed. I need to be away to do whatever for a few minutes. Say that to your children. Say that to your children. Little children can understand that. Also, ask them about how they're feeling in good times and bad times. Give them words to their emotions. You seem upset. You seem frustrated. You seem really happy that this is happening, so that they can then become aware of how they're feeling, because you have to know how you're feeling to know you need something else. So it goes, and literally babies can have this conversation, so to speak. Babies and their emotions can be labeled. So it's modeling, it's labeling emotions, it's giving them space and really validating their feelings, not being dismissive. Oh, you don't pay bills? What are you upset about? Or you don't have to do this. What are you upset about? Or, you're just in 3rd grade. So what if she doesn't want to be your friend? It's really taking the moment to validate what it is that your children are feeling and giving it words and giving them the space they need and helping them understand that self-care can be something small. It can be sleeping in. It could be staying up. It could be riding your bike. It doesn't have to come from someone else. They have the power to sort of create what it is that they need, and you respect them fully enough to give them what it is that they need for themselves.
That was so great. I don't have anything to add, Dominique, but that was just so incredible and powerful, and I appreciate it as a mom. So I just wanted to thank you.
Karin, do you have anything to add about, no, I was just gonna, okay. All right, great. So I'm gonna give the floor, so to speak, to one of the 2 questions. And then if we have time, we'll get to the last question. I think that this is just really important. And I think it actually speaks to something that Dominique said in terms of, giving power and a voice, right? The language for people to deal with self-care. This question comes from Kim R. Ford, who is the president and CEO of Martha's Table. She is class of '99, and she was our keynote speaker. Her question really gets to this issue of language, right? And what is self-care? Who has access to it? I'm just going to read the question. So her question is, how do we step back to engage people who are unaware of self-care or mindfulness? We are seeing an incredible increase in mental health issues, particularly in Black and Brown communities. It was mentioned earlier that people may be single, raising a family, and taking care of their parents. They're working or have lost their jobs. They don't have outdoor or indoor space to get away. How do we reach those families? How do we send the message that you're worthy of this time and space when that may seem so far from anything normal in their lives? And then she goes on to say, as I said in a previous conversation, Sidwell has an unusual relationship with the community in which we exist. Perhaps the BAA, our community, can offer some space and or expertise for family throughout DC. So I really want to get to, and this question is for everyone, but I really want to get to this idea of, how do we provide for people who are not familiar with the concept of self-care, which has been really, frankly, denied to our community for generations, right? All of us, regardless of where we stand today, we live through a generational trauma of literally being deliberately denied access to the concept of self-care, let alone the time to ourselves or even, being denied literal rest, right? So can we talk about that? And whoever would like to start, I welcome you to the floor.
I think one of the things we can do is change the language, or change what the language means. So, self-care, people might think of sort of the high-end spa days or whatever, but I think Black people have participated in self-care in many ways without calling it self-care. Just like you mentioned, like community is really big for the most part to Black and Brown communities, gathering together, music, just food. Those things are important to our culture, and so we can really label those things as self-care, and be models for smaller, I guess, less notarized, I'm a little bit lost for words, but less notarized or glorified images of self-care. It might be dancing. It might be, a quick twerk session. It's self-care, like standing in your living room twerking helps you feel good sometimes. So it's like we just help change what we consider self-care, and help change the language so that people really start to see that they don't have to wait for someone to give them access to a situation. We have our own. We have our own circumstances. We have our own ideas about what self-care is. Fashion, hair, like all these things that are culturally sort of what we practice every day is self-care. And sometimes you have to point that out to people and say, remember when, you went and did this? How'd you feel about that? How did that make you feel? Kim and I work in the same sort of field. So like after you dropped your son or daughter off, you went and had breakfast over here. How did that make you feel? That was a bit of self-care, and just start to have a paradigm shift in that way, helping people realize what we do is a part of it.
I think also awareness to things that, one takes for granted, like especially through COVID, the ability to breathe, to take a breath, looking at the different parts of our bodies and what they do for us, looking at the hands and, the ability to write, to text, to type, to hold a fork, to cut things, to brush your teeth, wash your face. So these things that we already have that are within us that don't require extra space, that don't require going out and spending money, what do you have that you're not aware of, not consciously aware of moment to moment? That's a gift.
So I want to share something that my mother used to do, and I still kind of do. I was raised by someone who I think didn't know that she was living like a mindful or like well-intentioned life, but she was. And one of the things that she did every morning was really like kind of do a body scan. And she would say, really literally say things to herself, like, wow, these legs, y'all have taken me everywhere I've ever wanted to go. I'm so thankful. I'm so thankful for you. And just being really aware in the moment of like, no, I mean, things like, boy, nobody likes this arm, but I'm so glad it's here. Can you imagine if this arm wasn't able to do whatever it was she was doing? And growing up with that, I didn't understand what I was being given, even in those moments. In having that awareness of like, I'm thankful for my breath, right? Like now, obviously I have words for that. But I think that is something that we can make accessible. I think that one of the things that happens in even in languaging and messaging around self-care is that it's deliberately in some ways exclusionary. It is framed around this idea of, the spa day or, people eating bonbons or, doing something that seems indulgent. And as Dominique was saying, our community is a community, right? We have the concept of the village that in and of itself is part of our self-care. And when we think about the ways that we have made it through the trauma and the joys, right, of our past, it is because we have at our foundation an interconnectedness that is undeniable and that we lean into in times of stress and strain. And so I think that when we think about what is self-care and we change that paradigm to say, you know what, maybe that's not for us. It's not that self-care isn't for us, but that the narrative that has been around self-care can just be pushed out of the way for a minute. I think that in and of itself can be empowering without having to actually take, we don't have to take on the spa day, right? Maybe we don't take on massage, but we change it so that even church, right? Church is something that we have used throughout, forever, right? And prayer and that like moment of quiet, it's meditative, right? It allows us to access that quiet inside ourselves and that of God within, so to speak. So anyway, the last thing that I want to do, I know that we're running out of time. We're at 12:14. There's one more question, and if we can go to that one really quickly, that is about health and safety, and what you have advised and what you continue to advise for people who are trying to stand up to, all of these moments, right? Cheryl mentions her daughter and grandson having to march, feeling that need to sort of stand up, right? And it not always being physically safe in the context of a pandemic. But what is your advice to keep physically safe and sane in these times?
Well, as the weather is changing, something that is with us that is very powerful is going outside and standing on the ground and consciously connecting with Mother Earth. Mother Earth will take what no longer serves us, recycle it, and send us back love. Going and, holding a tree, hugging a tree, same thing, whatever it is that one wants to release any blockages, they're just going to go down the tree trunk down to the soil of Mother Earth, and it's not hurting the tree, it's not hurting the earth. So just, taking, being appreciative of and taking advantage of the power, and also, being conscious of the breath and breathing.
Courtney, did you have anything that you gave as advice specifically with regard to protesting over the summer? I know that Sidwell had some, organized activities after George Floyd. How did you all respond to that? And what was your advice for students in terms of that physical safety?
Yeah, it was important to us to participate in what was happening after George Floyd's murder. So we did organize, our own sort of silent protest. We were trying to think of how to do it in a way that was COVID safe. That was still so early in the pandemic, and everyone was very aware of the risks of being together in person. But, you know, there's no way to stop a 16-year-old Sidwell student from doing what they want to do. So we just encourage them to, you know, follow the safety precautions and to be smart about what they're doing. But they needed to go, and we were in support of them using their voice. I mean, that's what our school is about. So, you know, my family participated in the silent protest that Sidwell put together. My kids were so excited to be able to do something actively because they were watching the news and seeing other people out there. And they would say, well, why can't we go down to the White House? Like, we want to march. I had taken my older daughter to the Women's March a few years prior. And so she fancies herself an activist at age 14. So it was just really about making sure that they had this health and safety guidance. So we worked with our amazing nurse Jazz and put information out to kids and to employees, like, here, the safety guidelines still are what they are, but we do want you to feel like you can participate. We were able to do so safely. But I think it's hard to tell people that they can't get out there in a moment like that. We all needed to do that.
I appreciate you guys. We are at 12:18. Thank you so much. This was such a fantastic experience. I mean, obviously I'm talking to you all, so I hope that it was a fantastic experience for the audience. I really can't wait for, you know, this to be shared with the broader community. Thank you all so much for your time. And I really can't thank you enough. We have our next session is at 12:30. If you don't have the Zoom link, get on there and register right now. You can go to sidwell.edu/BAA. You can still register, tell your friends. We have a full slate of activities for today, so continue to ride this wave with us. This is just such a fantastic opportunity. Thank you all. All right, I think we're done.
Just so you know, the meditation actually is going to be a grateful body scan today.
Ooh.
So what we were just talking about, yeah.
See y'all soon. Thank you so much.
Thank you all.